Today on Crunchweek, Pebble's cash crunch, Stripe's massive new valuation, and NSA reform hits a snag in the Senate. Hey there, I'm Colleen Taylor.
I'm Alex.
I'm Kyle.
And let's just dive right in before this long Memorial Day weekend.
Are you saying that you want to take off and leave and go home? That's what it sounds like.
I'm like, the clock's ticking, guys. Let's get it going.
If you look outside, it's quite gray, actually. I don't think this is really a park and barbecue kind of day.
Cut to the 24th, like...
Exactly.
Okay.
Speaking of countdowns, though.
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk first, because Pebble had some news, and I'm all about the wearables and gadgets and whatnot. So our John Biggs reported this week that Pebble's having a bit of a cash crunch, I guess is the phrase he used. Basically, while they raised $18 million in their wildly successful Kickstarter campaign for the Pebble Time, they are apparently reaching out to Silicon Valley investment banks saying, hey, we need a credit line, can you help us out?
But the $18 million wasn't a capital raise, it was a sale of gadgets, right? So they sold units for a price, and they didn't actually raise that to build stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of the misconception, right, around Kickstarter and these things. People think they raised all this money, but then they have to deliver.
Yeah, and that's what's tricky in particular about that one is that there was some confusion in the discussion around it at the time. It was like, wait, like it was kind of assumed at the time that they didn't actually need that money to make the watches, which was kind of confusing.
Oh,
now that we're hearing this, it's like, wait, okay, those assumptions were wrong apparently.
Well, why did we think that? Why did the market think that? Why did we assume they didn't need the capital?
I think it was the fact that the first iteration, the Pebble and then the Pebble Steel, seemed to be the most successful of the smartwatch category up to the Apple Watch being released.
But isn't that being the skinniest kid at fat camp because no one really bought them in the mainstream? They were nerd stream. They were popular among our friends, but like they weren't actually breakout successes.
It was definitely an early adopter-centric device, and I think that that's kind of where they're running into issues now with Pebble Time is like, okay, $18 million, that's great, but what's going to carry us into mainstream, if anything? You know, they need money just to they have more than 100 people working on this watch that's basically like the Kindle in a world of iPads.
Yeah.
It's for people who care about battery life, not like necessarily nice functionality, which might actually be a weakness in the long run.
But the new watch looks great, though. I mean, color screen, curved back. Compared to the other Pebbles, it's definitely the best one yet. So I'm confused why they can't bank on that success and therefore raise more capital, having proven market demand in the era of the Apple Watch.
I think that the fact that we're in the era of the Apple Watch is what is making people who might have, given them another round of funding rather than a line of credit, making them pause and not necessarily go down that road is because it's not like the people I speak to in the wearable space. You talk about like fitness trackers and things like that, and it seems to be there's a future for there. But when you talk about smartwatches, people question whether that will be a category or if it's just going to be the Apple Watch. If you look, like the Apple Watch in its first day outsold Android Wear by like 3 to 1.
Right.
And it's been out a year.
Yeah.
What was the first day sales numbers?
Apple didn't talk about it, which is like odd but expected, but like roughly 2 million.
Okay. Right, but now we'll have to see if it continues, if those sales will continue. I know that there was a huge drop-off after that first day. There was a big spike, and then it hasn't really done much since then, although we're still in the earliest days. So
still very early days.
It's hard not to root for Pebble. I mean, you want the early guy, the independent guy to succeed, and so...
So if you have capital... Pebble, they need it.
Just throw them in check.
Yeah.
And one other company that is seemingly not having much of a problem getting some checks is Stripe.
In the world of unicorns, the rich get richer.
Yeah. Stripe, we reported this week, is in talks for raising a really big new round of funding. TechCrunch's sources said it was led by, I think, DST Global, Yuri Milner's fund. But one thing that it seems like everyone here can agree on is that the valuation is going to be $5 billion.
After previously being 3.5, so moving on up.
Moving on up. Yeah. But I think what's interesting about this particular thing is how much Stripe has actually really denied that these talks are going on. They're denying the amount of money that we had initially reported they were raising.
Well, I mean, things that come up as rumors don't always happen. I mean, people said Verizon was going to buy AOL in January, and that was, of course, complete bullshit. But I mean, the $5 billion valuation though is really fun because it places it at the same scale as Zenefits, but just raised at a $4.5 billion post. So we have these two kind of companies right now, we can compare them. So question, if you had money, pretend, and you could put it into either Zenefits or Stripe at their current valuations, where would you put your capital?
Stripe.
I would say Stripe
and
as
why?
Well.
Leaner model, the fact that their success rides on the back that they made really, really nice tech to integrate, and that doesn't need, like, once you have that base, it's really about, like, pretty easy marketing in terms of just, like, hey, developers, integrating PayPal would be harder than this. and it'll do all of the same things.
Yes.
And the fact that they have like their new things, like their digital currency that makes it easier and cheaper to exchange between different currencies because it acts as like a transmission rather than having exchange fees.
Which is
really
awesome.
smart. And then you look at Zenith, it's the opposite, where they have to hire huge, like I think they're at 1,000 people, sales and like HR staff, just like to manage the accounts that they have. Like it's just a lot more resource intensive.
So why are they valued the same valuation though? What's driving that commensurate status?
HR is big.
Yeah, that's a good point. So payments though, I mean, like these are huge market spaces. I think Stripe at $5 billion makes a lot of sense. I like it.
Yeah, it actually doesn't seem crazy.
No,
you know,
which is weird.
Yeah,
but it doesn't seem crazy at all.
I know. Yeah, in a era where it seems like every week we have a new company that's raising some massive thing at a massive valuation. This is actually not shocking from Stripe. It'll be interesting to see when it actually closes though, because they have disputed the fact that they're raising this much capital. So we'll just have to see. Last thing here, NSA reform.
Well, maybe
uncertain
reform.
future.
Yeah. So the House passed the USA Freedom Act, which failed last year in the Senate. 338 to 88 was the count, so a huge majority in the House. And it's gone to the Senate where it's kind of run into, essentially the McConnell, basically. And they are doing a vote tomorrow on the bill, and it's not sure there's enough votes to pass it. And it's also not sure there are enough votes to re-up the Patriot Act for a couple of months while they figure this out. So we could actually see a sunsetting of the controversial parts of the Patriot Act tomorrow, essentially. And people are freaking out because they're like, oh, the terrorists are going to, in 2 days, apparently.
What game is McConnell playing? It doesn't make sense given the shift in Republican rhetoric around it in the House, just in the Senate to be like, no.
I don't think he gives a shit. I mean, he wanted to re-up the Patriot Act for 5 years on a clean reauthorization. That was his opening bid. Now he's allowing to vote on the Freedom Act because he knows it's going to fail. I mean, that's his math. And then I think he thinks that when it fails, there'll be no choice but to do a clean re-auth for 2, 3, 5 months to give them more time. That's what he wants anyways. And if the Freedom Act fails, then what does the House do? I don't know. But it's a huge mess right now all over Congress.
Realistically, what does this mean for the tech industry? I understand everyone's worried about national security and what this says for the country, but what does this mean for the world that TechCrunch covers?
The Freedom Act is okay. It's not great. It's not pervasive. It takes care of one program, essentially, the NSA has been doing, the call records program. But it doesn't end a lot of other stuff they're doing. So it's not the panacea that people think that it's going to be, but it's a good first step. And if we can't even pass a first step, that means reform really doesn't have much of a chance. And that means the tech industry can't depend on the government essentially taking care of itself, and therefore we have to work on encryption more broadly for all of our products to keep the government out of them. So if we can't have a legislative fix or even a minor solution to this problem that we have called the NSA, then it's on us as an industry to do it on our own. And so it's a depressing point, but it's just the way things are going to be.
Right. And do you ever see this really coming to a clean resolution? It seems to me that there are just so many different, ideologies happening right now in our Congress that it's going to be hard for anyone to come together and agree.
But it's been fun because we're seeing actual bipartisan support for this sort of reform. I mean, Rand Paul just did a kind of faux filibuster for 10.5 hours on the topic.
Libertarians and socialists working together.
Who would have ever thought? But the most delicious part of the story is watching small government conservatives argue that the government has to have all of our data. It's like, that's not at all reasonable. Why would you can be small government and pervasive government, but they're trying to make that work. And so I want to know what the political climate of this country will allow in terms of reform, because if we don't pull this off, it's, I think, a real check mark against our democracy and how it functions, because this is a publicly popular thing with bipartisan support that has a huge majority in the House, and it may fail because the Senate is crappy. So it's just something to keep your eye on for the future of America, if you will.
All right. Just a little note, keep your eye on for the future of America. Nice way to go into our Memorial Day weekend. Thank you. Thank you for watching, and tune in next week.